Okay, it is 4 o'clock and we are ready to begin our first webinar presentation. So we want to welcome all of our guests, our in-person guests here in Las Vegas. Thank you all for being here, and our online guests, thank you for joining us as well. We truly appreciate your attendance for our first webinar for Ancient Wisdom for a New Age. My name is Paul Benedict, and
I'm Terry Hunt.
And we are pleased to begin this webinar series with our Chapter 1 discussion today. First, before we do that, we are encouraging non-members of the Theosophical Society to consider joining. There will be a discount given, if not through the Society, through our Las Vegas Study Center for your year membership, which is normally $60, and there will be a $12 discount if membership is obtained before the end of the month. So please consider that. We will talk more about the Theosophical Society at a later time. A little history on our book. To our in-person guests, you've heard this. To our online guests, you may or may not have heard this. Our book was published in July of 2012. It's when the softcover edition came out. The seed was planted years and years ago when Terry and I met back in 2006. I attended his basic introductory theosophy class here in Las Vegas. And I fell in love with theosophy immediately. I found it just resonated with me in every aspect of it. I introduced Terry to Eckhart Tolle. We both admired this book and his first book that was written called The Power of Now. The Power of Now came out in 1997, and this book, A New Earth, came out in 2005. What really catapulted Eckhart Tolle to success is when Oprah discovered him and recommended his book in 2008. And subsequently, Oprah did a 10-week webinar. Some of you have seen that webinar. Terry and I created our own class based on Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, and we incorporated theosophical principles. And we started that in September of 2009, and that ran for 10 months. We loved it, and we had at some periods of time 25 plus people in attendance experiencing how we were combining theosophical principles with Eckhart Tolle's teaching of identifying the ego and applying New Age principles into our everyday real-world lives. The science and technical aspects of theosophy mate perfectly with Eckhart Tolle's teachings of ego recognition and understanding what our pain bodies are, what they look like, and understanding if we are reacting or acting through pure consciousness. So we had such a good time during this webinar that we did, or this 10-month discussion group that we did in 2009. We realized that we needed to put it into written format, and that's how the idea for our book came about. So our book, Ancient Wisdom for a New Age, is a combination of theosophical principles, Eckhart Tolle's teachings, our own insight, our own quiet observation, non-judgmental observation of the world around us and people in our lives, and our own meditative, intuitive practices. And here it is. And we feel like it is a real-world manual which is applicable to our everyday lives, which we find very, very valuable for us and for other people. Is there anything that you want to add to that?
No. I think we will do a little 1-minute meditation and then get right into the book.
Okay. All right. So we'll start off with a meditation before we get into the material. So everyone, please assume a comfortable position. We will chant the Om together and then have just a moment of silence.
Also, those of you who are joining us online, we invite you to join us too in a 1-minute silent meditation and wherever you happen to be.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to address a little bit about what our specific approach is to this topic. Ancient wisdom for a new age obviously is based on theosophical teachings. In the past, many theosophical writers and teachers have taken more of a jnana yoga approach to teaching these ancient wisdom teachings. And to put it in simpler words, that would be more of an academic approach, the same sort of thing that you would expect in a college or university, where you have textbooks, you have presentations, and you learn the material well enough to pass a test on it, and then you go on. But then the question is, what do you do with it? We take a little bit different approach. We take more of a Raja Yoga approach, which has everything to do with self-transformation, and means not only do you need to learn the material, but you also have to put it into practice in your everyday life. If it's not of practical use, then what is the reason for learning? That's kind of the approach that we have taken. Some may find our approach a little too simple, overly simple. We hope that you will not discard any of it because you think it's too simple. In fact, one of the tenets of Raja Yoga is that nothing is too small to pay attention to. There is a lesson that can be learned in everything as long as you are being focused and aware and present. And what many of us do is we discard things that we think are unimportant, and in fact, those are the very things that we need to be paying attention to. It's the tiny, tiny things in life often that trip us up. And if we're not paying attention, they will continue to trip us up. But the enlightened and more observant individual will watch very carefully everything that happens in life. And then one by one, these fetters, as they are sometimes called, or let's just call them obstacles, they get recognized, they get addressed, and they disappear. So that's what our approach has been. It will appeal specifically to two types of people: those who are fairly new to theosophy and who are trying to learn some of the basic concepts, and also it will appeal to those who are seriously wanting to apply self-transformation. If you've been studying for 20, 30, 40 years and have not seen a tremendous amount of change in your life, then maybe you're missing something. And even if you have seen a lot of change, there's always more that is out there. We perceive a tiny, tiny fraction of all that is going on around us at any given time. And if we are more observant, we will always find things that will help us in our journey. We use a lot of human psychology. Eckhart Tolle has a background in studying psychology, and even though neither Paul nor I studied psychology in university, I think we're pretty good at observing, and in fact anyone can be a good psychologist. If you're paying attention to the world around you, you are a psychologist. You are paying attention, and you are picking up cause and effect. We're always trying to trace the causes of what is happening today in the world. We can do this with our own lives, with our families, with our friends, especially those you've known the longest. Whoever in your life you've known long enough that you can look at the effects that are being manifested today in that person's life, and then trace back, sometimes for decades, the causes that produce those effects. You can often figure out exactly how they got to where they are, whether it's something positive or something negative. And by doing that, by being observant and by watching our psychology, we can make tremendous progress in this life. But without understanding human psychology, we're at a disadvantage, a severe disadvantage, in fact. We need to figure out how life works. Isn't that really what we're trying to do, to figure out how life works? Every creature in the world is trying to do that, whether he knows it or not. It doesn't matter if it's a butterfly or a tiger or a geranium or an orchid plant or a human being. We're all trying to figure out how life works at our own level. So we need to understand and figure out a little bit about human psychology if we're going to make any real progress. Have any insights on that?
Got a story to read.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, at the beginning of the book, before chapter 1 even starts, there's a very special poem that was found in the desk of HPB, Helena Blavatsky, after she passed away. And this is very profound, very meaningful to us, and it has lots of significance. So I'm going to read this before we even open up to chapter 1. There is a road, steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that opens inward only and closes fast behind the neophyte forevermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, there is reward past all telling, the power to bless and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come.
I think that this is especially pertinent for a variety of reasons. One is that Thursday, just 3 days ago, was White Lotus Day, a special day for all theosophists around the world. It's the day each year where we remember the life of Helena Blavatsky. She passed away on May 8th, 1891, so 123 years ago, if my math is correct. But that short life, she lived only 59 years, made a tremendous difference in the world. This is an individual to whom we owe a tremendous amount. In fact, few people know that if you look up the meaning of New Age, it is connected with her name. There would be no New Age movement as we know it without H.P. Blavatsky and the teachings that she brought through to the Western world. And what she brought through were these ancient wisdom teachings that had existed for thousands of years in other cultures, but were almost entirely unknown in the Western world. There was a few things that I want to point out about this thing, it's not a poem, but this list of information and suggestions. First, she tells us that she can tell us how to find those who know the secret gateway that opens inward only and closes fast behind the neophyte forevermore. And then she mentions 3 qualities that have to be developed in order for this neophyte, this aspirant, to make progress on this path. Obviously, she's talking about a path of enlightenment. The 3 qualities that she mentions are dauntless courage, spotless purity, and strong intellect. Now, these are three things that seem simple, but obviously require lifetimes of effort in order to develop fully. Dauntless courage, spotless purity, and strong intellect, according to what she wrote, are the three qualities that we must absolutely develop if we want to reach the goal. Now, what is the goal? She puts it very plainly. It is to be able to bless and save humanity. It's not for anything personal. It's not for fame or fortune or glory. In fact, you will not gain any of those things by treading the path, but what you will gain is tremendous insight, tremendous enlightenment, and the ability to help your fellow human beings achieve the same goal. One thing that she doesn't really mention is that these are the goals of every great teacher, to help lift up humanity. She often talked about lifting a little bit of the heavy karma of the human kingdom. It is true that we are in a phase of our human existence that is extremely difficult and painful at this time. Obviously, we have made it that way ourselves to some extent because we haven't yet learned some of the ways of the universe. We haven't put ourselves in tune with universal law, at least not completely yet. We're still trying to learn how these laws work. As one of the adepts told us in the Mahatma letters, there is only one law in the entire universe. And all other laws come from that. That one law is the law of harmony. The law of harmony is the only law, and all others are subsets of that law. Whatever goes out of equilibrium or balance has to be rebalanced. And we see that in many different ways in life. So as we get into touch and into harmony with the universe and with this natural law of harmony, and obviously the law of karma is completely the same type of law, which is rebalancing and getting back into alignment, then everything becomes simple. We often get taken to task because we say several times in the book that life is simple, but we make it difficult. Well, we stick by what we say. Life is simple. It can be simple if we are willing to let it be. But too often we insist on trying to bend the law, the natural law, to meet our own goals, which usually have something to do with our personal needs.
In chapter 1, we talk a lot about the animal kingdom and the consciousness that inhabits animal bodies. I wonder if we were to ask an animal, is life easy or hard? I wonder what an animal would say. Since they don't have the same kind of ego that we have, would they say life is easy or hard?
I don't think they would even have any concept. It would just be
life is
natural. Life is life.
Exactly.
I think so.
It is.
I think
It
that's
is.
exactly right.
Just is. Period.
I did want to mention just one thing about the cover of our book. All of you online can see it anyway. This is a painting by a famous painter, Nicholas Roerich, a Russian painter who did his painting in the early 1900s and made several trips to India, North India, Tibet, sometimes with a pack train of up to 100 animals and all of the people necessary to carry all of their supplies, food, etc. for months at a time. and traveling through remote areas. He painted some incredible paintings. There's a museum in New York City devoted exclusively to some of his paintings. And if you ever get there, it's up, I think, on West 107th Street. Make sure you take a look at that museum because it's very interesting. This particular painting, though, he painted specifically in honor of Madame Blavatsky. It's called The Messenger, and it's generally assumed that she is represented by the figure coming to the door, bringing a message of new light. You can see the light behind this messenger, and someone is opening the door, and this messenger is bringing something, a teaching, a new light, the possibility for enlightenment, for illumination. So I think it's very appropriate that he chose that as a theme for this painting, which he dedicated to her honor. There are actually two versions of this painting. One is in the headquarters of the Theosophical Society at Adyar in India. And the other one is in Russia, in St. Petersburg. The one we have actually is from that painting because that's the one that had the best image available. And the director of the museum in New York was kind enough to help us in obtaining a copy of that.
A couple of cautionary remarks, perhaps, before we go into into the prodigal son story. There's no magic pill for what we talk about. We do simplify certain things and certain difficult teachings of spiritual progress. We do simplify it because life can be easy, but there's no magic pill that'll bring instantaneous enlightenment, as some people say that there is. It's there's no key that you can just put in some keyhole and turn, and all of a sudden everything is perfectly enlightened in your life. We do offer simple steps, though, that if we take them and we work every single day, there is progress to be made, and very quickly, as long as we are willing to analyze ourselves and analyze our lives. And as Terry always says, he says, take a metaphorical flashlight and shine it in the darkest corners of your being. If we're willing to do that and be honest with ourselves first, that is the path. That's the key. Once we work on ourselves methodically and honestly, that's the way we achieve non-suffering. And what really is suffering? That's a main question. Why is life hard? Well, we don't understand life. We don't understand it. We're on a quest for understanding. We're on a quest for knowledge, and if we do have the knowledge, if we do figure things out and we still suffer, it's because we haven't applied them and we don't act on them, on the knowledge that we've gained. That's what we're trying to work on here, is finding understanding, acquiring knowledge, and then practicing it, putting it into our lives. Further, nothing that we say or suggest should be taken as truth. Please don't ever think that we know. The concepts in this book, we don't even understand half of them. Okay, maybe we understand half, but nothing we say is truth unless it makes sense to you. If it's true for you, you decide that only. There's nothing we can say to prove that it's truth. Just hear it. If it makes sense, please take it. If it doesn't make sense, please don't take it. That's all we can offer and all we can say.
Also, those who are ready to go all the way and to achieve what it is set out by the piece that Madame Blavatsky wrote are people who have already had a tremendous amount of life experience, not just in this incarnation, but as a result of a long series of incarnations. And so that person would be able to fully take advantage of what she outlined and also what we have outlined in the book. Now, what about the rest of us who maybe are still short on some of this experience? Well, we can still learn. We can take, as Paul said, what does apply in our life, and we can leave aside anything that doesn't seem pertinent at the present time. But also, let's at least kind of look to the future. Maybe in this lifetime I cannot practice non-judgment fully, but at least I can practice it to some extent. Maybe I can pay a little more attention every day and try to get to the point where I eliminate judging from my life. On the other hand, maybe I need more experience. Maybe I need to experience some of the results of not having learned this lesson or any other lesson. I'm just picking something at random. Yes?
I think each of us has a ring of truth with regards to things that was not the process class discussed.
Summarize his questions.
Right.
So in one key.
So what William pointed out is that we all have something in us that resonates when you hear something that you think sounds true. And that's obvious for most of us. Whenever we hear something, for many of us, when we first heard about the Theosophical teachings, it immediately rang true. It's like we recognize something that we already knew. So the ring of truth is one of these methods. But don't be too harsh on yourself. If you're not ready yet to live these precepts to the fullest, then at least start working on them. And don't be afraid when you fall, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and just keep going again. Never, ever, ever give up.
Okay, so chapter 1, our spiritual journey. There's a quote from one of the ancient Hindu texts called the Upanishads that we have here at the beginning of our chapter. As a hawk or an eagle, having soared high in the air, wings its way back to its resting place, being so fatigued, so does the soul. Having experienced the phenomenal, return into itself, where it can sleep beyond all desires, beyond all dreams.
Obviously, that is a description of the cyclic nature of all life. The period of manifestation or the period of activity followed by a period of rest. Doesn't matter whether it's a monarch caterpillar or whether it is a cosmos. Everything follows that same pattern. Coming awake, coming to life, manifesting, experiencing, becoming involved, and then shutting down again.
We can
Closing
find
down.
examples of these all over the world, all over the universe, and in ourselves. Our in-breath and out-breath is a very basic example of a cycle. Going to sleep at night and waking up in the morning is a very simple example of a cycle. And the whole universe, Terry mentioned the whole cosmos, expansion of the universe and contraction, and then the multiverse theory.
So one thing that's interesting in this quote, which is from the Upanishads, is that it mentions that the soul needing to rest. And in this sense, it is using the word soul as our higher spiritual nature. Soul is going to figure into many of our discussions, and we're going to try to understand as much as possible exactly what is meant by the soul. In our terminology, we use the higher self or the soul interchangeably. But we want to know as much as possible as we can about this higher self, because Raja Yoga has as a goal to achieve oneness with our soul. When it talks about yoga being union, it's about union with our higher self, perfect union. And in fact, when we become completely one with our higher self, it disappears as a separate being, a separate part of our being. We take on all of the qualities of the soul and really become the soul. Then this personality, the physical body and its other sentient abilities to perceive, becomes nothing more than an instrument. And it's actually an instrument for the universe. As it says in Adam Blavatsky's quote, to become, to be able to help and save humanity. That is an instrument of the universe that can do that. But it can only happen when the personal self becomes a cipher, when our personal needs no longer are important in life, but only what is of use to the universe. And the interesting thing about that is once we reach that point, all of your personal needs are automatically taken care of. The universe takes care of its instruments, assuming that you truly are one of its instruments. And if you are, it takes care of you. Everything you need comes to you easily. And on the other hand, you use all of your assets, resources, and abilities for the service of mankind and for your fellow human beings. The prodigal son. This is a story that a lot of people relate to for some reason. And interestingly, it's only mentioned one place in the Bible, and that's in the book of Luke. And there are 3 different stories that tie in here. Each one is an example of repentance. We used it in a very different way, but in the Bible, it talks about a young man who was headstrong and willful and who became a sinner, went out into the world and committed many sins, and then at some point was sorry for the sins he had committed, decided that he was going to return home and offer to work as a hired hand for his father. We interpret that a little bit differently, and in fact, we're not the only ones. This tale most likely was not new in the Bible. In fact, a lot of the stories that are told come from other sources, so it's quite likely that this came from another source as well. But it seems more probable that it is about the return to the source. And it's an excellent metaphor for that very concept. The return to the source being our spiritual ancestral home. So in theosophy and in esoteric science, as I like to call it, we say that we are all sparks of divinity, or at least we were in the beginning. Nothing but a spark of divinity. Jim, if you want to put up that chart by John Algeo, we have, this comes from the book Theosophy and Introductory Study Course. And it is displaying exactly the concept that we're talking about with this prodigal son story. Our original nature is completely divine. There is nothing other than divinity within it. And it has to come down into matter or manifestation as we call it, in order to gain experience. Without this involution into matter, it would never gain experience. It would never change from its high, exalted spiritual nature. So, when in the Bible it talks about the fall of man as if it were an enormous mistake, and that if it hadn't happened, that we would all live in a perfect state of being, that's not true. We were meant to fall into matter. That's part of the plan. Without it, we would gain no experience. You can all imagine what it would be like to live in a state where you never had to work, where you never had to figure out problems. Food was provided for you, everything you wanted. It would be extremely boring. We thrive on challenges. We thrive on learning to overcome obstacles. It's part of our nature. The nature of spirit is to grow. And the only way you can grow is by overcoming obstacles. And the only way you can have any obstacles is if there is manifestation. In manifestation, you have polarity. You have positive and negative. You have masculine and feminine. You have something against which you can judge yourself and other things. You can make comparisons. But in unity, there is nothing. There is no growth in unity. Now, we do have to have rest periods periodically. And the grand cycle is that we come back to that resting point once we have returned to the source. So that's an enormous cycle. Notice that as it comes down into manifestation, it goes through various phases, and we're going to talk about those phases in our in the chapter here. Up until we reach the human kingdom, there's still a tremendous amount of contact with the higher levels of consciousness. These represent different forms and different levels of consciousness. And we will explore those different levels a little more fully in the second chapter next time. But the point here is to just grasp the overall concept. The descent into matter, which we term evolution. And by the way, until theosophy...
Involution.
Involution. Yes, until theosophy came along, there was no real concept of involution versus evolution. Scientists talked about evolution, and religious people talked about creation. But there was no talk about involution and evolution. So we have a little bit different approach than either one, either scientists or religious people. We insist that we are divine by nature, that we have to come into incarnation in order to gain more experience, and that enlightenment comes once we begin to reawaken to our divine nature. And also, interestingly enough, the very word involution means becoming enmeshed in something, almost like becoming stuck. The more we come into it, the more we are involved in it, and the more we are invested in it, to the point that in the human kingdom, we unfortunately are separated so far, we have come so far that we have almost completely forgotten our divine nature. Animals and plants haven't forgotten it, but we, to a very large degree, believe that this phenomenal world and our personality is who we are. So we've been tricked, so to speak, into believing that this is me. And we have to gain enlightenment in order to regain that more divine nature. It's within us the whole time, but we almost completely lose sight of it. Yoga is the key that helps us regain that spiritual insight. You have something to add?
Well, no, I don't have anything to add to this. Okay. Moving into our next section is migrations. This cycle or journey, this grand journey that Terry is speaking about, is similar to a migration. A grand migration taking a long time. Like, how long does it take? A couple hours? Eons. It takes eons. So it's a grand, huge migration. We look at other migrations to get just some type of example of how this works in the animal kingdom as well, since we're going to be talking about consciousness inhabiting the animal world as well. And we give the example in the book about the monarch butterfly migration. And we see something very interesting about the consciousness that lives within the monarch butterfly species, for example. Their migratory pattern is incredible, because not one individual butterfly actually makes the entire journey itself. And that brings to mind the idea that there's some larger intelligence operating behind the flocks of butterflies that are making this massive journey that takes months, and the butterflies don't even live that long through the whole journey. So the journey is a grand migration, and somehow the knowledge or the instinct of the journey is transmitted or just lives within all the butterflies. There are other animals that have amazing migratory patterns as well. Does anybody have any idea of other animals that make very interesting migratory journeys or have interesting instinctual patterns in regards to their how far they swim, for example, or where they travel in order to mate, or whales? Definitely.
And we invite our online students also to answer this.
In specific, the baleen whale makes a 14,000-mile journey every year from one location in the Pacific to another to mate every year. Another example that we didn't mention in the book is the leatherback sea turtle. They have a very interesting pattern with regards to laying their eggs on particular beaches. On the west coast of the United States, they happen to know exactly which beach they were born, and they sometimes travel all the way from Indonesia back to the west coast of the United States to the exact beach, and they've been tracked, and this has been studied, where they were physically hatched, where that individual was hatched. They come back to lay their own eggs. We don't know how or why, but that just makes you think of the collective consciousness that's involved with the animal species. What is the divine intuition or hand that is playing with these migratory patterns? We also talked about the Arctic tern. What does the Arctic tern do?
Well, he or she holds the record for the longest migration, 44,000 miles each year, from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back. So in the 30 years that they normally live, that would be 1.3 million miles, more than most of us travel in our entire lifetime. Also, most people know about the migration patterns of March of the Penguins. Yes.
I haven't seen that. The movie March of the Penguins. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Tell us about it, Jim.
In the meantime, we all know about salmon, how they have to swim upstream against tremendous obstacles to get back to where they were born. And they used to think that it was just a myth that they actually went back to the same spot where they were born. But just as with the leatherback turtles, they tracked them, and sure enough, they did. They went right back to the same spot where they were born. And how they know, I have no idea.
Does Theosophy attempt to explain the navigation that's involved?
Well, no,
Might want to
not
repeat the question. Just-
Does Theosophy explain why this happens? The navigation? No, but I have a theory, and that is that there's a certain degree of telepathy, and that they are very much in contact with the other members of their species. There is some kind of a network of energies that they respond to, and to which humans ignore or have lost contact with. We still live within a network of all of our fellow human beings, but we've kind of lost touch, and for a good reason. We are the most separate of all creatures on this planet. No other creature can feel the sense of loneliness that we can. And it's because that has been lost. Not that that was a bad thing. It had to happen too, in order to develop as far as possible our mental ability. Then as we develop more of our spiritual ability and our higher levels of sensitivity, we come into that again, and we are able to communicate. It probably will not be too many more centuries before we as a human race will be able to communicate to a fair degree telepathically with other members of our race.
It's very clear that this ability to communicate is prevalent in the animal kingdom. We've all seen the schools of fish travel together, and if you watch the Nature Channel like I do a lot, sometimes the predator fish will dive right in the middle of a school of fish, and they'll just open up like this. The predator will go right through, and then the fish will close back up, and then they'll swim together just like one unit. Flocks of birds do the same thing. In Africa, the wildebeest, sometimes more than 1 million individuals of wildebeest will be migrating together as one unit, along with other animals too. Zebra, 500,000 zebra, 200,000 gazelle, sometimes in one massive unit of over 1 million will be migrating together. And there's power in numbers, so the lions and the other predators sometimes can't even, there's power in numbers.
Well put.
Well put. Okay.
So, we know that the consciousness goes through the different forms. It starts actually in the mineral form. It actually comes down through other forms, and we need to point out that even though we talk about physical forms, like these human bodies that we occupy, that there are forms that exist on other levels that we can't see with our human eyes. And those are also considered forms. Every thought that you think creates a form. Every emotion that you feel creates a form. It's really nothing more than an energy field, and it can be perceived by individuals who are more perceptive or attuned than the average person is, but it is still just as real as this physical body. We consider the physical world to be solid, but even scientists tell you that it's anything but solid. And in fact, we tell you that it's not solid at all. And the reason is that it is simply a perception that at a certain level of existence, we think that this table is a solid object. But we're telling you that you are an illusion knocking on an illusion. And it seems real, but it's not. Now this is kind of a theme through different chapters. But right now we just want you to think about this. As Eckhart Tolle says, one day you will wake up and realize that all of what you thought was physical life was just a dream. And That's exactly the way we look at it too. You wake up in the morning and whatever you were dreaming, you probably thought was very real. In fact, you may have knocked on a door in your dream. Seemed very solid, but then you wake up and say, oh, obviously that wasn't a door, but it sure seemed like it. It was just a dream. So the old nursery rhyme, row, row, row your boat, or the little song, life is but a dream, maybe there's some hidden meaning in that. So we start out, or the consciousness has to start out in some kind of a form. So it starts out higher levels, comes down finally to the physical over eons of time, and then it lands in the mineral kingdom, where it spends probably a few billion years. And I guess it doesn't really matter, does it? Does a piece of silica know how long it's been in existence? Probably not. So what can a mineral experience? We say in Theosophy that even a mineral has consciousness. But what kind of consciousness could a mineral have? It could, are there any comments there?
Mm-hmm. Well, Jim mentioned something about the penguins earlier.
Okay, go ahead.
How penguins will sometimes walk up to 80 miles in 50 degree below winds to a very specific spot to lay their eggs, because it's a very special spot for them. Just interesting patterns that penguins exhibit. And Eugene said that he's having trouble hearing us, but Jim fixed it.
Oh, okay, cool. We have one person who is watching us from Costa Rica. So I don't know where the other people are. Maybe they can let us know.
There are 10 people.
So the consciousness has to have some kind of means of interaction or gaining experience in life. And it's the same always. These patterns that we see in our own physical universe are repeated in other universes. Not exactly, but the overall concepts, the overall processes are always the same. Nature does not reinvent the wheel. It follows the same patterns over and over and over again. One of the things that we're doing right now is it's important to note. In esoteric science, they always say that you look at the macrocosm first before you focus on the microcosm. And that's for a very good reason. You have to zoom out and get the overall picture and see the big picture first before you zoom in and start looking at details of it. So that's what we're doing in our book and in our discussion right now. So even though it's a repetition for most people, we have to get the big picture, zoom out, see the big cycles, and then we can zoom into our human cycle later throughout the rest of this book and figure out how do we apply some of these natural cycles that we see.
Eckhart Tolle says, look at life through an astronaut's eyes. Zoom out, see the planet from an astronaut's view. Understand the big picture, Mother Earth, Gaia, the symbiosis of all life together first, and understand that, internalize that, notice the big picture, and then we can go back and work on some fine details. And it kind of helps us remember which details aren't even important also, because a lot of them aren't. Everything is important to acknowledge, but not much is important to worry about.
In the Kabbalistic maxim that we repeated in the book, it says the breath, which in our terminology is Atma, the breath becomes a stone, the stone a plant, the plant an animal, the animal a man, the man a spirit, and the spirit a god. So it has to reach the mineral kingdom first, where it experiences tremendous pressure. Now, it doesn't think of it as pressure because it doesn't have anything to compare it with, unless it is brought up to the surface. Diamonds, for example, were formed at a particular point in the history of our Earth. And they were formed deep, deep, deep within the Earth. But, so they were under tremendous pressure, physical pressure, and heat. Enormous heat and pressure. And then, through volcanic activity, they were thrust upward to near or on the surface of the Earth. So everything that we find as diamonds now were formed, I forget the exact time period, but I think it was more or less 50 million years ago at a particular phase of the Earth's heating and cooling. And so those particular minerals have experienced in their lifetime, we can call it a lifetime, a change, a tremendous change from this heat and pressure to being perhaps right on the surface of the Earth. So do they recognize that? They, in their own way, they must.
This may be a stupid question. Towards the end of the chapter, you mentioned that animals learn from domestication. Do diamonds, is the experience of domestication being like humans?
I doubt it. Now, as we said, the question is, do diamonds experience something through domestication? Meaning, as you wear a diamond, does it pick up something from you? And possibly it does, but I don't think it's meaningful to its own existence because it still has an enormous amount to go through. Usually what happens is that the individuals expressing consciousness are most affected by those who are slightly above them and are able to help those who are slightly behind them in advancement. But if you get too large of a gap, there's not enough connecting information or not enough in common, so to speak, that you can have much of an effect one way or the other. That's why we always use this symbology of helping the person just behind you on the ladder while you're being helped by the one just ahead of you. Let's talk, so anyway, those that are at the apex of the mineral kingdom obviously are the diamonds, rubies, the precious gems and semi-precious stones. Those are the epitome, I guess, of the mineral kingdom. So what we're talking about here is that as it progresses through the different stages, there comes a point when that consciousness is ready to graduate, we use the word graduate, to the next phase of expansion. And in the case of minerals, that would be the plant kingdom. They obviously start out as unicellular plants like algae and then become more and more complex over millions of years. The plant kingdom, actually the first land plants, for many millions of years, the only plants had to live in water or right near it so that it could absorb the water directly. And the first land plants only appeared 480 million years ago. So, the first ones were more like mosses and liverworts. Only later did the woody branching plants develop and eventually trees that could live away from the water source, but they still had to have water. No plant can live without water. Eventually, plants developed seeds and flowering plants. That was an enormous jump in consciousness for the plant kingdom. Paul's going to read the very beginning of Eckhart Tolle's book.
Chapter 1 of his book, A New Earth, is called The Flowering of Human Consciousness. Earth, 114 million years ago, one morning just after sunrise. The first flower ever to appear on the planet opens up to receive the rays of the sun. The planet had already been covered in vegetation for millions of years. The first flower probably did not survive for long, and flowers must have remained rare and isolated phenomena, since conditions were most likely not favorable for widespread flowering to occur. One day, however, a critical threshold was reached, and suddenly there would have been an explosion of color and scent all over the planet, if a perceiving consciousness had been there to witness it. That's the enlightenment of the of the plant kingdom.
So there were no animals even there to witness it, only other plants and minerals. Very interesting. So what have plants learned? What we kind of got a vague idea of what minerals might have learned, a sense of pressure, heat, sunlight, wind, maybe. But what about plants? They are far more complex than minerals. In fact, they absorb minerals and use minerals in their growth.
Does anybody have a green thumb here? No? You grow artichokes.
I'm looking.
Does anybody online have a green thumb? Those of us who are close with plants are usually very in tune with them and what they need and what they do. And there is some sort of consciousness within plants. What do they learn?
Well, there's actually quite a bit of consciousness. They have learned survival techniques, for one.
Mm-hmm.
They have learned how to reproduce, how to communicate even. It's absolutely amazing to me that they can use pheromones to communicate and to even attract specific insects. Pheromones in general are extremely fine scents, I guess, that are produced by plants, animals, and humans to create some type of communication. In humans, for example, they're used for attracting a mate, and the same in animals. A lot of what we use as human beings came to us from our previous animal experience. Pheromones are used for attraction. They're used for an alarm system to notify other members of the species when there is danger. So plants can actually communicate and can communicate a warning system that they're under attack, for example, whether it's from insects or from a blight or from some sort of other plant. What else did they learn?
Has anybody watched the movie Avatar? Anyone? Avatar? Okay. You might remember the Pandoran neural network that they talk about on the planet of the moon of Pandora. They were well aware, the inhabitants of the planet were well aware of the connection that all fauna shared, and they call it a neural network. And it was akin to a super brain. Their deity was called Ewa, and all plants were connected through electrochemical connections. And when one plant would be harmed by anything at all, other plants would react, just like what Terry is saying. And this was brought mainstream through that movie. It's well known to be a real phenomenon.
I think that, and this is just supposition, I think that they are also able to communicate in a sense telepathically, not just with pheromones that can be detected by science, but I think there's also a higher degree of communication that maybe we are not able to measure just yet, and hopefully will be able to in the future. They experience, obviously, birth, growth, reproduction, decay, and death. So they experience the same kind of cycle that we do as human beings. You plant a tree in your backyard, and it seems like it should live forever, but it doesn't. It actually goes through a cycle, and maybe in 50, 60, 75 years it will be dead. Some last longer than that, but just as animals have a cycle of life and growth and reproduction and decay and death, so do plants. So that is reproduced every time a new plant is born.
I wonder if it would be prudent for us to mention why we even care about what the minerals and plants and animals are learning. I think we should mention that the spirit that dwells within minerals, once it graduates into the plant kingdom and then next the animal kingdom and after that the human kingdom, what's the whole purpose? Why do we even care about studying this? Does anyone know why we're even focusing on this at all, or any ideas of why this is even important to talk about? Eugene's typing. Let's see what Eugene says.
To understand how life works.
To understand how life works. And as Terry mentioned earlier, the nature of spirit is growth. And how do we grow if we're not learning and expanding, right? So we're learning. The consciousness that is here now didn't just get here by chance. It had to learn certain things. So we're just talking about the evolution of consciousness.
We're learning how we affect them and they affect us by loving and
That's part of
we
it.
talk to plants, they respond to that.
Plants do respond when we have present energy with them, of course. I think.
I think too, Christine is onto something here. It also makes us aware of our responsibility. We're going to be talking about karma and free will in just a few minutes. But we have a responsibility that no one else has, we as human beings. Plants and animals kind of take care of themselves, and there are symbiotic relationships that are very interesting between species and between different individuals within the same species sometimes, but very different species sometimes. But we as humans often think that all other species, all other creatures are here for our benefit. Well, that's not really true. They're here for us to learn how to become co-creators. And that involves responsibility. That involves sensitivity. So the story at the beginning of the prodigal son who learned a lot about the animals that he worked with is the beginning of stewardship, of learning that animals are not just for our benefit, but we have a responsibility to help them to grow and to become more enlightened at their own level. So,
Eugene says plants have come from mosses to redwood forests. It's symbolic of the time and energy involved in our evolutionary process. Yes.
all right. So by seeing how they
Yes.
grew, how obviously the giant redwood trees and the bristlecone pines went through numerous other phases of existence. They didn't start out, they didn't go from the mineral kingdom to becoming a sequoia tree. They had to go through the same kind of steps that we go through. They had to start at the ground floor as maybe an amoeba. I mean, not an amoeba, a single cell algae, and then mosses, and then shrubs before they became a giant oak tree or a sequoia tree.
Or a flowering
plant. So it's this series, it's this continuing expansion of consciousness, but it requires different forms at different times. As Eckhart Tolle says, all forms are unstable.
Mm-hmm.
All forms are unstable, and that's true because they're only temporary. We get attached to them. We get attached to them and think that this is Christine or this is Lisa, when in fact you are not the form, but you are the spiritual being that is using this form for current expression and for an instrument in order to grow. Okay, let's go into the animal kingdom. Um, we all know, more about the animal kingdom than we do probably about plants or minerals, because we all watch the nature program, right? So the same thing happens with the animal kingdom. They start out as, unicellular amoebas, and grow through more complicated grubs and worms, and then only later become mammals and the higher developed animals. Oh, yes. So what are some of the things that animals learn while in this long phase of evolution that lasts for millions upon millions of years?
Movement is one, getting from point A to point B. Survival.
Survival is a big one.
I think they can learn love from us too, how we care about them,
A form of love, yeah, absolutely.
because they respond.
They respond, and hopefully not just for the food. Although I think children do the same thing, don't they? There's this. They've learned affection. Certainly, they can learn affection. They learned locomotion, swimming first, because obviously the animal kingdom started in the ocean, just like the plant kingdom started in water.
Meredith says social interaction, most definitely. Social structures are developed in the animal kingdom.
Alpha male, alpha female, the pecking order, and just in many instances, the tendency for one individual to help others. If, one mother may look after the children of another mother, so that she can go out and hunt for food. And there is a certain amount of cooperation that is learned. Tools. Animals have learned how to use tools. A little twig sometimes, or a stone to break open a mollusk. They're incredibly talented sometimes in the use of their tools.
Monkeys know how to take rocks and smash coconuts
Yes.
and open coconuts. Yeah.
Anything else there?
I don't know.
Cooperation, teaching. They'll teach others. They'll actually show them how they've learned how to do something, and then so they actually become teachers. So they have teachers and students just like we do. Sexual reproduction, and obviously their mates, and guarding their mates from anyone who's trying to take them away. So that's all part of the social interaction that they learn. I think you can see that we're getting kind of close to the human. There's not a whole lot that's totally different between humans and animals,
The higher
except the higher animals, except in degree. Also, they learn some emotions. They are fight or flight, fear, anger, jealousy.
Animals display a lot of jealousy. They protect, the alpha male will protect his females until, to the death, really.
All right, so I think we've covered those three pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit more about the human kingdom. The next time we meet, which is 2 weeks from today, it will be all about the human experience, and we'll talk about it more in depth. But right now, we want to give at least just a little overview of it.
So what are some of the more highly enlightened, so to speak, animals in the animal kingdom? What's the apotheosis of the animal kingdom? What are some of the higher animals? Elephants, whales. Meredith says whales. Mm-hmm.
Dolphins, eel.
Yes, dolphins.
They're closest to us, I think they said.
Dolphins are quite close. Yes, they have very intricate communication abilities. Certainly dogs, horses, these kinds of animals.
Yes, too.
Certain parrots.
Parrots also.
Yeah, you've all heard of the gray, African gray parrots that can be taught a lot of things. Certain apes and, certain members of the ape kingdom can learn 200 words or more of vocabulary.
There's very little difference between some of the highest animals and human beings. As Terry was saying, certain primates can almost speak and can recognize words and can think and problem solve, almost do math. So what is it actually that separates the human animal from the animal? What is the distinguishing factor?
Responsibility.
That's a result of our ability to think and our human mind, the mind and the individual soul. It's said that in the animal kingdom, there isn't necessarily one soul for each individual animal. There might be some type of group soul or group consciousness, but when the consciousness finally graduates and is ready to occupy this type of physical vehicle, a human body, human physical body, we have an individualized soul as well. And we have the ability to think rationally, our mind. So with this tremendous, Eugene says conscious choice as one of the distinguishing factors, and that's exactly where we're going with this. We have the ability to choose, and what we call that is free will. Animals, of course, can choose, but they're not driven by right and wrong or morals or ethics. They're driven by pure instinct. We have the ability to judge and make conscious decisions. With that comes tremendous responsibility. Now that we're able to create our outcome, we have the responsibility to deal with the consequences of whatever outcomes we set into motion.
Karma.
We call that karma. Exactly. So this is what sets the human being apart from the animal. And this is where the real growth starts. The mineral kingdom, the people in the mineral world, the consciousness in the mineral world, billions of years to learn basic things like pressure and heat. We in the human world can learn tremendous lessons in one day by making a certain decision that creates some type of interaction that we don't like or that we do like. Oh, we're learning how to make decisions that create pain and suffering or happiness and pleasure. So with these kinds of results attached to our actions, we start to learn very quickly. So the growth starts happening very quickly in the human realm.
I think it's interesting to point out here just how different karma is specifically for the human kingdom. Now, obviously, karma in general, being a cause and effect sort of thing, operates across the board for all levels of all different kingdoms, including mineral, plant, animal, etc. But specifically, humans create personal karma because of our ability to choose, as Paul said, and to make choices. Those that are in the plant and animal kingdom, they don't create personal karma like we do. It is part of the group karma. Everything is more associated with the whole group rather than as individuals. We create personal karma because we perceive ourselves as individual units that belong to other groups. Once we get to, we're going to talk in future classes about the superhuman kingdom, what comes after the humans. They don't experience karma like we do because they have overcome all need for personal need fulfillment. They don't have any personal needs. They don't have any personal ego like we do. They have gotten rid of that. And that's one of the things that has to happen in order for you to progress to that point of enlightenment. So we humans are the only ones who experience this degree of personal karma.
Karma can also be described as the gentle or not so gentle guide that keeps us in harmony with nature's path. Nature has a path. I've mentioned it before. It's almost like a stream or a flow. And we know when we're in it because life seems like it's good and things are happening right for us and synchronicities and serendipities and coincidences are happening and things are setting up. We're in the flow of life, nature's flow. When we find ourselves out of that flow, we start getting knocked around and bumped around because we're not in line with nature. Nature has a path and a purpose. So karma can be said, karma is said to be like a guide. When we get too far out of sync with nature, we get bumped back gently, and then a little bit less gently, and then sometimes karma will knock the heck out of us and cause our life to go upside down at times. And we need to notice those helpful hints before they become that kind of hint. Because karma can do that. And it might not be immediate. We have a whole chapter on karma. It's a really interesting topic.
As Paul says, the farther we get out of line with natural law, the more intense the pressure to turn us back in the right direction. And that's exactly right. I like to use the example that nature at first will just kind of thump you on the head to get your attention. And if that doesn't work, then it will use a ruler. And if that doesn't work, a 2x4. And if that doesn't work, then the house caves in on you. But sooner or later, it will get your attention. Don't think that you can escape it, because you can't. If something is happening in your life, maybe life is trying to get your attention. And maybe with a little bit of introspection and watching carefully and trying to see what caused that situation, you may gain a degree of enlightenment.
Is there any evil in the mineral kingdom? Are any minerals bad? Is there like a bad piece of granite over there, like sandstone? And it sounds strange to talk about that because minerals don't make decisions and they can't choose to be evil. Same thing with the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. Can you say there are any evil animals? I mean, when a lion hunts down a gazelle and kills it, is it being evil, or is it just doing what it does, right? That's what it does. It's just doing what its job is. What about people? Are humans doing what they just do, or are humans bad? It's a tough one. We have a whole chapter on the question of evil. No.
Well, I think it depends on how you look at it. I'm going to give you a secret here. In esoteric science, if it's a yes and no question, the answer is always yes and no. It always depends on what point of view you happen to look at it. So are humans evil? From one perspective, not at all. And that is because they are going through a phase where they're having to learn from making choices. And obviously we make poor choices sometimes and get to experience the results. So from that point of view, we're just as good as the animals or plants, because we're doing what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be learning by making mistakes. On the other hand, we are making mistakes. We haven't quite yet learned all the principles involved. Once we do, we will stop making mistakes, and then we'll be ready to graduate.
Meredith is LOLing.
Oh.
Someone's laughing. There's actually an icon that you can click on here that says laughter, and we're supposed to hear like canned laughter. But if we turned everybody's microphone on, it would get loud. We have 6 minutes left.
All right.
Our first session.
So let's finish up here. We have, in Theosophy, we talk about evolution, just as the scientists do. But we include a little bit more. We include the evolution not only of the forms, which is what science concentrates on, but the evolution of the consciousness that is using that. In fact, that is our primary focus. The forms will always be created to accommodate that increasing consciousness. So as long as it is increasing, the forms will continue to evolve just as well. Don't think that it's always going to be physical, though. There are forms, as we said, on other levels of existence, and those can be more complicated than the physical ones.
Pardon me if I didn't notice this in the book. Is the sea, the ocean, is that part of the mineral kingdom?
Well,
The water itself, you mean?
certainly the salts within it.
Atmosphere? How do these fit into it?
Wow, is the ocean part of the mineral kingdom is the question. So
How does the ocean fit?
how does it fit into the, good question. We'll try to answer that in our next class.
William stumped the teacher.
No. We do not claim to know everything, and in fact, we ask more questions than we answer. One last thing before we finish our class, and that is, when we enter the human kingdom, there is what is called in Theosophy a third outpouring of spirit. The third outpouring creates this human soul for each individual. And that is the point at which we then can create karma and have gained free will and the potential to become a co-creator in the spiritual hierarchy. We will be talking about the spiritual hierarchy a little bit more as we go, but we humans actually have a chance to become part of the spiritual hierarchy and to take our place in helping the evolution of consciousness on our own planet, but not just in general, but from a very specific point of view and from knowledge and experience. So any last questions or comments from people online, anyone? All right, our next chapter is called The Human Experience. We will send out to everyone online and to everyone in the class here questions again and these questions are meant to help you in your study so that you come up, we want you to be thinking, not just reading the material, but thinking through it just like we have. What? Awesome. All right. No last questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Good. Thank you very much to both our online students and to our studio audience here.
All right, and thank you very much to Jim.
Yes, we want to mention Jim Bosco has made it possible for us to do this, and the Theosophical Society in America is sponsoring the online portion of this. So a big thank you to them.